kickstart this webinar together with Joe and Thomas. We'll give 2 or 3 more minutes for everyone who is joining as we speak, and we'll start in about 2 or 3 minutes. Hi again, everyone. So it is 11 a.m. here in Boston, and we'll just again give 1 or 2 more minutes for everyone who is still joining. And at 11:02 sharp, we are going to start. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, everyone. My name is Eran Kinzwoner. I am working for Lightrun as a global head of product marketing. In the past, I have been also an author and evangelist in the software quality business, and I'm really happy and excited to have with me today Joe Larizza from Bank of Montreal and Thomas Haver from M&T. Hi guys, how are you?
Doing great, thank you.
And today's webinar is actually going to feature, as you can see on the Zoom backgrounds of my colleagues, we're going to try and dive deep into the challenges in troubleshooting and ensuring high quality in production of live applications in the financial vertical. And before we get started, we're going to have a lot of questions and answers, and feel free to send us also questions and ping us on LinkedIn and other channels as you like. I'll just say a word about who we are and who is Lightrun that is hosting the webinar. For those of you who are not familiar, Lightrun is a developer observability platform that allows developers to troubleshoot live applications directly from their IDE, whether it's IntelliJ, Visual Studio Code, VS Code.dev, and other environments. We support the majority of the runtime languages, ranging from Java to Node.js, Python, and .NET. And we allow basically developers and any other engineers who are trying to troubleshoot and find issues or root cause of issues quite fast to put through instrumentation, dynamic instrumentation, logs, metrics, and snapshots, which are actually live breakpoints, into their running code in production or pre-production, where they're using different environments, Kubernetes, serverless, and other use cases. So we allow them to instrument and troubleshoot their application in production directly from their IDE. And this usually results in reduction of MTTR, the mean time to resolution, higher developer productivity, and also reduction in logging costs. We'll try to understand, as part of this kind of environment, how enterprise banks, financial organizations are doing so, and in this webinar. So before we get started, just let's make a short introduction, and starting with you, Thomas, if you can just introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So my name is Thomas Haver. I work as a master software engineer for M&T Bank. I've worked in the financial industry for quite a while, traversing a few different banks. My primary role here at M&T is working on an enterprise level, specifically in the area of DevOps practices, test automation, and quality.
Awesome. And Joe, if you can also introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. For myself, I currently work for the Bank of Montreal here in Canada, and it's a pleasure working here. As for specifically, I've been in the financial industry in testing for 20 plus years. I go back to the days when there was a pencil and a piece of paper before any of the tools came on board. Currently, I'm also a representative for the North American Software Testing Awards, and I look forward to a lot of submissions because I'm all about preventing bugs from actually getting into production. So that's my goal and my objective. I've worked for a lot of financial institutions. So I'm going to talk basically industry best practices, that kind of stuff, a general overview, not specifically for any one bank, but just what I've observed over the last few years in this space. But I look forward to seeing many of you in person, hopefully this year in Toronto, come November at the award ceremony. And
Awesome.
Good luck for those who are submitting.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, guys. So this panel webinar is going to have no slides. So it's going to be very easy and very interactive. We have prepared 10 questions, which are surrounding the troubleshooting in production. To your point, Joe, sometimes bugs do reach production or other environments when you want to troubleshoot them and move fast. But we'll get to the observability part of this reality. But let's start, maybe starting with you, Joe. If you can introduce from your experience in BMO and maybe previous organizations, your current CI/CD process, and what is working for you and what's not working, and maybe why.
Okay. So the delivery pipeline is the backbone for any software engineering practice. And I can say throughout the years, I've noticed a few common threads pretty well everywhere I've gone. And one of them is, I'll just go over a short little list. It's configuration. So production configuration of how the application runs and operates is different than what you have in your test environments or your lower environments. And that's problematic. With that, there's also, how do you maintain the configuration? A lot of institutions are, they still rely on manual processes for individuals to go in and set the flags and the configuration. It's still not automated completely, and it causes discrepancies between production and lower environments. So your test results in the lower environments say one thing, but then when you promote it to production, things break, and unfortunately. The other key thing is that the lower environments, just the way code is migrated from one environment to another before it gets into production, the code packages, people are still trying to automate that pipeline with some success. A lot of challenges in our space. I still see that it hasn't been resolved completely. So they still rely on manual intervention, which is problematic. It's very similar in nature to the configuration. And then, of course, when you're talking large institutions, the big thing that gets us is just the integration of all the environments that we have. We're not solely just one environment, one product out in production. That world would be so much easier than, a typical bank or a large institution with multi-facing systems. They're all working together, and the integration of those systems is problematic, especially when it comes to, you're doing one set of changes in one system, and if you don't test the other system, you bring down the whole ecosystem down, and those are devastating when they do occur. And hate to say this, but in our industry, it does make the newspapers when the ecosystem does go down, right?
Yeah, yeah, we have seen many examples in the past. Yeah, so that's good, and we'll dive deeper, into these points, Joe, in the other questions, because you mentioned few very important pieces or challenges that you are facing. So we'll touch on them in the follow-up questions. Before that, Thomas, what do you see from your current process with CI/CD and challenges? What's working, what's not working?
Yeah, so this being financially focused as a webinar, we can say that working for a bank is also working for a technology museum. You don't have that same sort of like focus on changing and being bleeding edge. What the focus is trying to have something that works, is reliable for customers. It's the difference of if you have a production incident, you go down and you are an online retailer. All right, you may miss out on sales or like the confidence for that, like the conversions you're looking for. You do that as a bank where people can't get to, their accounts, can't pay their bills, can't pay their mortgage. Like that is something that's more serious from a customer standpoint. Or you work in the wealth space for a bank and you have a bad experience, or you have downtime where you may have a client that is 8 figures, 9 figures even, that's something that you want to do the white glove treatment for them. So we use a sort of a accumulation of different tools, and that's by virtue of us accruing other institutions. So going everywhere from using Azure DevOps as part of our pipeline to using GitLab, some using Jenkins, even though maybe they're not supposed to, but that's my personal favorite. Using OpenShift, like it goes across the board here. And I'd say that is probably going to be the same for anyone here from a financial institution of a large size, is that your business segments within that financial institution and the technology space sort of behave like their own little kingdoms. And they have their own sort of like tech ecosystem where you may have some redundancy of tooling going across the board for it. And that leads to, of course, a lot of challenges because none of these teams work in isolation. There's a great deal of connectedness between those groups, that they share common data, common linkages. And so when you want to release, now you're only going as fast as your slowest team. Some of which have, very laborious manual processes, where it's almost like, turning the keys on a submarine to launch like a missile there, where you have to have them go at the same time, as opposed to a true like push button deployment.
Got it. So maybe following up on that, Thomas, so you said that you had many teams and many integration. I think, Joe, you were also saying about the integration between different components as well. So when something does break, let's focus on production and user specific issues, which are, in my mind, especially for a bank, are the most critical ones. So do you have kind of a streamlined process today between dev, ops, and testing that allows you to address fast, understand the root cause of the issue? If you can describe the workflow, Thomas, of this dev test ops relationship when a production issue does happen, hopefully not too much, but when it does happen, how does it look?
Yeah, so, I'd say, so there's various forms of, you could say, alerting of an issue. So one of those is the existing monitoring tooling in place. So for us, like we use the Elk stack for one, and there's various other sources across the bank. And so when an issue comes in from there, that is caught by folks who are on 24/7 or get the alerts on there. And you spin up sort of a health check swarm, as in the folks who are necessary, who have either been tapped to be on call or just generally available, all come in together to collaborate on an issue. The other form that it can take is, of course, like customers notifying it. And I would say is like where you get to the worst case of like you actually have a customer impact where they are the first ones to notice and not ours. And that goes through a contact center that then gets filed within, in our case, service now, and it becomes an incident depending upon the severity. Now, some of those like start off at a base level severity, and as we see the impact, that goes up and escalates and leads to escalating number of people who are engaged in this to help fix it. But I'd say those are the two primaries. The one that I'm like more focused on myself is like trying to prevent those from actually occurring, production incidents, and that's by being resilient in our production -1 environment, as well as having effective logging and monitoring in place in production. So that way, if we're starting to see an issue crop up, then we can take action, preventive action, before it turns into a larger issue.
Got it. Got it. What's on your end, Joe, in BMO? How does it look like?
I want to, not much I can add to what Thomas said. I mean, that's just typical standard procedures across the industry, right? Some of the things I do notice, and if it works well or not, is having support teams, dedicated support teams. There's still a number of firms out there that don't have dedicated support teams with the right resources to troubleshoot and to resolve issues in production. They still rely on the dev team. So it's the support team unfortunately don't have the experience, and then they tap a dev team member to come in, and it takes attention away from projects, code releases, all that kind of stuff, upgrades, and they're being diverted to help on the support side. In worst case scenarios, you might even see the occasion of especially something that is a major outage of some sort in production, SWAT teams being assembled. And those are hopefully don't happen too often, but I have seen them across the industry in many occasions where a SWAT team is necessary to do resolution. All hands on deck type of mentality. One of the things that I would add to that is that the growing concern, especially in the institutions, and Thomas just hinted this, is that we have a museum of technology. So we have everything up and running. There's not just one little element, but it's a museum. And with that comes an aging workforce. And so the specific knowledge sets required, the SMEs that actually know those systems, they're retiring and they're not available anymore. And so troubleshooting in production is now becoming problematic, especially when you don't longer have that knowledge base within the organization to solve those problems. So tooling, for better or worse, you really need to set up those alerts so you can get on top of the issues and try to figure it out as quickly as possible.
Noted. So just to summarize, with the museum of tools and different ages of these environments or technologies, well, you are getting the alerts, but then to your point, Joe, troubleshooting or finding the root cause, especially when you're dealing with the legacy stuff where you don't have the expertise in-house, or people left or retired or whatever, that's when things are becoming a bit more challenging, especially when you're talking about outages in production where you care about, I don't know, SLA, MTTR, and just, brand recognition. You want to fix them obviously as soon as possible. So that's definitely something that I noted as a challenge. So just maybe following up on that. So just to confirm, at least in your two organizations, BMO and M&T, you are still dealing with, when you say museum, a mix of legacy monolithic as well as microservices and more modern applications. So you have different environments, different components that are supported by your technology stack, right?
That's correct.
Got it. And for that, you are using obviously different tool stack from different ages that supports these different technologies. Okay. That's might not be surprising to the financial organizations, but it's definitely something that is challenging, especially within a CI/CD pipeline that you want to support, and especially in troubleshooting. So that's cool. So I know that you represent the quality side of the house, and you're doing a great job. I know you guys personally, but if you can share, maybe starting with you, Thomas, currently from what you are experiencing with R&D, with engineering, with your developers, what if you can list, the top 3 challenges that you hear from developers, especially when they are trying to troubleshoot and debug issues. Again, they can be coming from production, pre-production, maybe you're using feature flags, progressive delivery. What kind of challenges do you face or you hear from your developers?
Yeah, I'd say this is an excellent question because it had a very, I'd say, vibrant discussion yesterday about the same issue. And I'm sure Joe, like, will nod an approval or add some color to this. Like the primary when we talk about lower environments is always test data. That's just something that's an issue no matter what. And this is part of that sort of complex interconnected nature where you have to work with some third parties, people go through refreshes, or you work with these monoliths that you can't just generate data at the snap of a fingers. You have to use, some tools for assisting. One of the other components that I'd say that's more relevant to this discussion is like the observability piece of understanding like the health of the application, the status of the work, and like where you have quote unquote like code churn, et cetera, to be able to diagnose like the source of some of the problems. There are certain problems that we encounter, say, with our mobile applications that takes multiple people investigating and going down the path of playing the equivalent of the game Clue to determine like the source of this was like, Colonel Mustard in the study with the wrench to try to determine. And those are the areas that provide, I would say, the most stress for development team members because, we want to be able to quickly diagnose a problem, do that sort of failure analysis, and then put in the change that's not going to only correct it, but also put in the monitoring in place so we can understand if that issue is going to crop up again or similar types of issues. And I'd say that's the primary one because, as Joe mentioned, like we have a number of people here who can be considered oracles. They know a tremendous amount about the business logic of the application, how some of these older systems work. But those folks are supplemented with a great deal of developers who have less experience in the financial institution. They may be experts in the technology space, but not in how the systems behave. And you need to put in place, so I'd say, some assistive technologies to ensure that those folks can be onboarded beyond just simple documentation, but help in their day-to-day work.
Great. Joe, anything to add on that? And maybe just
Thomas hits, Thomas hits everything. I really can't add much to it, but I just want to emphasize that, the data element of it in the lower environments and the refresh of data and having profiles that represent what currently takes place in production. And that seems to be the weakness that many teams have observed across the industry, is that everything works in the lower environments, but as soon as they go to production, they didn't consider, this customer had this profile and this profile causes these issues, and the system and the application doesn't know how to handle that particular profile. So one of the quickest things you can do to prevent production issues and going down all the these rabbit holes is having good data. You cannot be successful at our jobs in preventing bugs unless you have great data, and that is still very problematic in our industry. We still do not have the best data, and there's all kinds of reasons for it. There's regulations. You can't have production data in lower environments, for regulation issues and so forth, and audit and all that kind of stuff. But having good data helps solve a lot of problems.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more with you guys. And just to close the topic of debugging or engineering challenges, when something does happen, do you know if your developers can access the production live environment from their local IDEs, or to your point earlier, they need some kind of a mimic subset or replica of their environment that they can only then reproduce the issue or fix it, etc. Because again, from what I see in my domain, with Lightrun and our clients and experience, is that developers, to get access to production environments, specifically when you're talking in the financial industry, it's close to impossible. And for that, you need the ops and everyone else kind of involved. So is that something that you also face within your organization, developer gaining access to these production environments?
Yeah, it's strictly controlled. It's all comes down to access, permissions, and who has the authorization to do it. It's very controlled, so it is not, I wouldn't say it's problematic, but it's controlled. So when time is of an essence, getting that access can be, time consuming.
Yeah, I'd say ditto on that of, there's three primary types of controls, like to go to like the 101 of this, like the preventive, detective, and corrective control. For financial systems, you want to put preventive controls in place for production, and that means limiting the access to a select number of people who can make changes to that system and also monitoring the changes. You don't want to have, sort of like a junior level developer halfway across the world have production access to $100 billion bank. Like it's just not good practice. Like you say it out loud, like you understand, like, yes, it's very clear by that statement, like why you don't want to have it. So you gate this on purpose. And I'd say it's okay to gate it, via like limiting the number of humans who can interact with it, because we work in the financial industry. We're not necessarily interested on pushing 1,000 releases a day, for certain of our systems. Like putting it into a cadence where it's released once every 2 weeks is quite all right for many of those. And so it makes sense to have those controls in place. So what does that mean? To your original question, Oran, that means in our production -1, or any other lower environments, to try to make them mimic production as closely as possible. So that way the developer working in that next highest level environment is able to reproduce the issue and introduce the change that's going to potentially correct it. So we have the confidence in production. For production itself, like we have to rely on monitoring and logs to come in to tell us if there's an issue, or to at least demonstrate to us from a validation perspective that change was indeed successful. Because again, we're only going to allow a few select people who are likely also senior in the organization to have access to those systems in production.
Got it. Thank you. So I think even though we didn't say the word, we started leading into security kind of discussion, and maybe that's a nice segue towards the next question, and that's about prioritizing CVEs. From my previous world and even the current one, I've learned that security is so important, so critical, especially in the financial industry. And for that, we have different practices, right? We have SAST, we have DAST, and we have SCA, software composition analysis. But the thing with these kind of tools, while they are very important, is that they produce a lot of, some would say, false negatives. I would just say sometimes it's too much noise, and it distracts developers from focusing on the right specific issues, the ones that are actually, of high priority. So maybe starting, either one can jump in if you like, but do you have a method today between test, dev, and sometimes even ops, because it's sometimes coming from the marketplace as well as a new CVE? How do you prioritize CVEs today for your financial applications? If you want to start, go ahead, Thomas.
Well, I'll be quick here because I'm quite loquacious on here. I don't want to steal all the time, but we use a lot of common scanning tools that go across various environments, both production and lower environments, that are interconnected to ServiceNow, that will let us know that, here's a vulnerability, here's how it's been rated, say within the industry, and here's the time span in which you're given, or time box, to remediate this. It can be anything from, a potential vulnerability with Notepad++ to, database version that could be something that's serious on there. And just like any sort of production incident, based upon the potential impact that vulnerability could have, will dictate the timeline for remediation of that. Some of those require a great deal of coordination because, they are in fact touching production systems. And so we have to go through, a form of validation, like pulling all hands on deck to go ahead and make those changes to those production systems. Other ones are easier. You just have in place, some aspect of, you need to go through the expected testing activities to indicate that, yes, the change was put in place, it was successful, you have evidence of that change. So that way we're also on the right side of our audit teams.
How does it look at your end, Joe?
I see this as more of a black box and an intentional black box. A lot of that knowledge, understanding is purposely kept isolated from the masses, right? From inside the house and also outside the house. So when we talk about military zones and all the detail behind it, it's top secret stuff, obviously. But I see this as, I've worked at a number of different firms, and the skill set to identify these CVEs is you can rely on the tools and so forth, but you have to know what you're doing. And so a lot of firms are just outsourcing that. A lot of pen tests and a lot of detail tests go on by a third party to really check to see how things are moving. And if you have any issues that you need to resolve. So they rely on the internal teams, but they also, especially the larger banks and others. There's, many firms, even in retail space, they rely on a third party to come in and show them where they have weaknesses, right? And then, of course, you have the infrastructure, how that's all set up. That's very top secret. Only a few people really truly understand it. And nine out of 10 times, even the developers have no sense of what the military zone looks like around their applications. They just are not aware of what's going on.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the problem. And what we are seeing, at Lightrun, we see that tools like Sneak and other tools that are providing the scanning of especially third-party open source code that is being used by many applications today, while they produce a nice chart of yellow, green, and unfortunately some reds, these kind of high priority CVEs. I can just mention from the very not too long past, Log4j and these kind of vulnerabilities that were impacting many other applications that were dependent on these libraries. But at the end of the day, and to your point, you need a skill set. You need to also understand if this vulnerability is being hit by a user within your user flow, okay, in specific geography, in specific region, in specific user base, because the fact that there is a CVE doesn't necessarily mean that your end users are impacted by that. And that's kind of the new trend that we are seeing as a matter of kind of optimizing this dev productivity to try and focus on the high priority CVEs, but in a sense, as they are actually being met or hit, exploitable by the end user in production within the code flows. So to your point, yeah, you need the expertise. You also need to really be able to understand where exactly this CVE impacts the end user in the runtime environment. And based on that, you say, okay, it's not even impacting my end user. I don't need to worry about it. So there is a CVE. It's not my business. Okay. So there is a trend. We are seeing it. And I hope that, maybe in the future that everyone is talking about shift left of everything, right? Maybe this shift left of CVE prioritization security would be also done by developers. Again, with Lightrun, we see it as part of our snapshotting and logging. We allow you to really troubleshoot and find out whether this CVE is being identified and detected in runtime. And this does not require you to be a security expert. You just put some kind of a snapshot, and whether it was caught or not, it means, yes, I'm impacted or I'm not impacted. It's just a 0 or 1. It's either you are or you aren't, but it's a bigger story than that. So thank you for these comments. With that, let's move to the next item, and that's about measurements and metrics. So one of the things that hearing many years ago, and it's becoming kind of with DevOps becoming the new norm, is this DORA metrics and dev productivity, MTTR, how many deployments per, I don't know, week, per day, how many story points, etc. Do you have a kind of a DORA metrics set or a set of KPIs around test and dev productivity that you are using in the bank from one iteration to the next? I know that it's never a one and done, right? You're always continuously improving, but Maybe starting with you, Joe, do you know what kind of key metrics you have to measure your release, your dev productivity, test productivity as well?
Well, it always comes down to time to market. How long does it take for you to get the changes into production, right? And
Right.
so, I've seen, in the financial industry, you may not necessarily need to push code out every 2 weeks. You might not even need to push it out every quarter. It all depends on the application and the business channel that you're supporting and what the needs are. So measuring, code productivity, you're looking at it from that perspective. You're not really diving deep into a developer and saying, well, how many lines of code are you developing per day? Because you know that the system can be gamed, right? They can make things very, I wouldn't say complex, but they can just rig the game so that it shows that they're very productive, productivity is there. But I look at it and I say, I'm very old school. 20% of the workforce does 80% of the coding. The others are catching up, but you're still relying on that 20%. And unfortunately, in our museums, that 20% of people is decreasing, right? Those knowledge experts are just not available anymore. They're getting older and they're moving on. But I love what I'm seeing now in the marketplace when you're looking at the AIs, being able to develop code in milliseconds and working code, bug-free code. I mean, that's where the future is going. I know we're going to have some discussion on that, but that's how I look at it. I'm not too gun-ho about bringing in some monitoring tools to see how productive a developer is. I think it's just I'm adding cost and I'm not adding value.
Got it. Thank you. Thomas, anything different at M&T from an KPI perspective?
Yeah, so I would say this is another instance where it's sort of disparate depending, for each of the different business segments where, they may have their own target, instead of something that's given as a sort of enterprise and things that you want to track. Like a good, for instance, is if you're looking at like end user monitoring, whether you say like Adobe Analytics or Quantum as we have now, of looking to see like jumping off points for customers or rage clicks, that sort of thing, for looking at the user experience as a way to monitor how users interact with the system. And then internally, it's a range of tools that are actually leveraged, to look at, are we hitting our deliverables, whether that's simple like dashboards within our project tracking tools to determine, like, are we on target to hit our goal? What are the number of defects we have? Ways in which we can look at like defects associated with given functional areas of our application to determine trouble spots, to individual developer contributions. And I want to specify this, like I want to echo what Joe said. Like, you can't look at it as like an individual by individual basis. That's like good Hart's law in action will occur if, like, as soon as you set a target to a metric, it ceases to be a metric. And if you're looking at like number of commits the developer has, number of lines of code, like we all agree, like I think for the folks who are probably listening as well, like those are bad sort of things to track. Instead, you want to look at like code churn in a given area of your application, like how frequently that area is changed, because that also is a good indication where you're going to end up having the most defects. So there, are certain tools that can assist you with that. And then looking at your application itself in lower environments and in production to see where you have either it could be slowness or where you have common failure points in there, or with your infrastructure itself. Like, do you have a few sort of, we can say like recalcitrant servers that, you need to either institute some self-healing to like remove it from the lineup or force a restart. So there's a lot of areas you can do. Like if you take it to the extreme, I think it goes into like the use case of like what like Etsy had done in prior, where they've got like 1,000 different ways to track things that are going on, and you can just sort of clue yourself into what's necessary or important for your application. But ours is all over the place, and we're on that journey of we need more observability here. Like everyone understands and agrees upon it, because we have identified like a lot of pain points. It's just getting the critical mass of people to push that forward this year and into the next few years.
Got it. Thank you both, Thomas and Joe. So since we are in a financial webinar, the next question is about FinOps and cost optimization. When you're looking at FinOps shifting left, especially in a financial organization, do you see a rise of adopting FinOps methodologies within your organization? Are you hearing any talks about that? And are you concerned, especially in the economic downturn that we are currently experiencing? Do you see adoption or people starting, especially in the engineering groups, starting to look at the cost of cloud computing? Again, I'm not talking about the legacy and monolithic. I'm talking about more of the cloud cost optimization. Do you see this as a thing in M&T and BMO? Maybe starting with you, Thomas.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look like the hat and like the labeling on here in terms of like the change in culture, it doesn't say M&T Tech on my hat of that. It says, I'm sorry, it doesn't say M&T Bank. It says M&T Tech on there, and that's like this focus of M&T, and I think a lot of banks, especially since the pandemic, have come to the realization that they're not just like branch only companies, as in like community banks. Like, you're a technology company that is also working in finance, and like treating technology as a first class citizen as part of that is essential to being successful going forward. And I would say that's where the investment, or at least for my company, has been the last couple of years during the pandemic, of going on a hiring spree because you want to bring in talented people who've done it before, shifting to be more cloud focused we can, having some additional like bleeding edge technologies. And it's always this sort of thing of, we both work for banks, Joe and I, and like banks by their nature are risk averse. Like they want to be conservative because, like, of course, you want to exist through any sort of downturns that may occur, like we saw with like First National Bank, SVB, et cetera. And like keeping that risk profile is doing things purposefully. Of, if we're going to go to the cloud, are we going to tether ourselves to just one provider, or are we going to use multiple to have some redundancy in place? I think that's like what Datadog's actually done. They use 3 different cloud providers. Is making sure that when we're going to like event-oriented like architecture, and they're using microservices over monoliths, of making sure that we have both that are in place, so that way if there's any issues, that we can always revert back and use, say, a strangler pattern to remove some of those functionalities as we go through that adoption, so we don't have sort of like a big bang approach that's going to jolt our customers. Like all those sorts of things of like being purposeful in your approach, and working hand in hand with architecture to make sure that the entirety of the bank is on the same page and going through this change, so you don't end up with like a technology museum for the long term, as in every single business segment is still doing their own thing, but instead we're all moving together towards a similar set of technology patterns that we want to adopt.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. And it's the journey, the barn doors are open. Everybody's going down this journey. I can't add much to what Thomas said, but I can say that, there's a lot of effort, especially I would say, some of the larger institutions, generally speaking, they're looking at re-engineering some of those museums and bringing them up to speed in, the modern era. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity in the years ahead where, we're risk averse, as Thomas mentioned. There's definitely budget issues that you have to worry about, and funding to do all this re-engineering. And when you do re-engineering, you get a better system. Your rate of return on that is going to take a few years to recover those costs. So people are less likely to pull the trigger. But with the AIs that are coming down the pipe, I can see a potential of a lot of re-engineering taking place in the years ahead, and that a lot of these museums will slowly start to disappear in the next foreseeable future.
Great, Joe and Thomas. What I can add on top of that is that what I see as part of being a member in the FinOps Foundation, and I was actually, you see the yellow thing, I actually even underwent the certification myself, so I'm even a practitioner. The topics that I see that are coming up throughout the discussion within the FinOps organization, where you see all the cloud providers being active, AWS, Azure, and Microsoft, everyone, all the big AWS, sorry, everyone is fully invested in supporting these FinOps trends because they are the ones that are causing this uncontrolled spending by engineering, which sometimes, you know, the developers don't care if it costs extra, I don't know, 10K or 20K a month. They just need to get the job done. But at the end of the day, when you look at the bill of the cloud providers at the end of the month, and when you start to break it down into different divisions within either the bank or other organization, you see that it piles up to be a huge thing. And what the FinOps Foundation is trying to do is, A, drive more awareness, shift it left to the developers so they know that what they are spending is kind of, there is a room for optimization, I would say that. But there are things like logging, okay? Do you really need to put in each and every line this amount of logs that then pile up into a huge bill, whether you're paying into Datadog or to other cloud providers? It is a given. So better cost allocation, better negotiation with cloud providers, better control over logging and stuff like that. These are a few of the agenda items of the FinOps Foundation, trying to shift left more awareness and accountability to the developers so that they are better aware and controlling their budget at the end of the day. So with that, let's move a bit to the future. And Joy, you said a few words about AI, but before touching AI, ML, ChatGPT, and all the other noise that we see almost every day, every minute, and some of us are actually using it already, what big trends do you see, Joe, within your organization, you know, technology-wise, and many others, you know, even R&D-wise, workflow related within your engineering team? So some trends that you see.
Yeah. Well, AI is here, and it can do a lot of things if you allow it to do it. And that's the key word, in my opinion, is if you allow it. So the institutions, you know, the financial industry, the big banks or banks in general, they want to keep things, you know, from a product level, their offerings, the services, you know, confidential. They don't want to let the cat out of the bag. So going to the cloud and using AI, because you're not going to have an AI for each firm. I don't foresee that, but you know, your suppliers that have this technology and you're using these tools, you know, the acceptance, do you put it on the cloud? Do you have a private cloud? The challenges of shared environments across the industry, those type of things. And then of course, you got to look at it from regulations as well, right? So, you know, right now in our space, in the testing space, you can have an AI look at requirements, build your test cases, build your test data, and build your automation scripts to execute the test. And then you can actually let it run at the test and you can see your feedback. We already can do that today. That is not you know, a top secret. That's available to us. But regulations, will the government allow that kind of capability to be, you know, spread across, you know, the country, the world? Because when you're looking at it from a job perspective, it's going to be a disruption. It's going to change what we do on a day-to-day basis. It's going to create some new and exciting roles because people are not going to disappear from that world. But the change and the transformation that needs to take place in order to adopt this technology is the key. And so it's that pace of change is going to be, you know, and the acceptance of those changes, those are the hurdles and challenges of the foreseeable future. So the tools are there. It's whether we have the right regulations, and you know, you can go on many channels about AI and some of the things that people worry about on AIs, but you got to look at it from that perspective. So I think those are the hurdles that we're going to start to see more and more of, and start talking about it. I think that's good if we have the dialogue and get those things set up and adopted in a controlled fashion. I think that will be the secret.
Awesome. I like the thing that you say, if we allow it. Yeah, I think being in control over new technologies, new trends, especially in the financial organization, allowing change and modernization to penetrate and improve the practices that we are doing is definitely a key or a requirement for this adoption or changes to definitely come in. So thank you for that, Joe. Thomas, what kind of trends do you see within M&T and in your marketplace?
Yeah, I'd say similar. I mean, and for the folks watching this, like you see, Joe and I give a lot of like similar answers, and that's because like, I'd say the financial industry is facing all these challenges across the board. It's not just like unique to a given bank. And in this case, like what I would term as like the use of you could say assistive technology in various forms. Is something that is not going to go away. It's just something we have to adopt and regulate. And I think even like yesterday, the head of OpenAI was testifying in front of Congress and saying that, yes, like we actually do need regulation in this space because today, like where do we use, whether it's Chat GPT or robotic process automation or RPA tools or other sort of like you could say assistive technologies? Well, for one, just about most organizations, they use some form of chatbot for customer interaction. Like if you don't have a service agent available, then you have some form of like a decisioning tree to help you out or something more complex to assist you. RPA, I think is sort of like omnipresent now across the board, not just financial institutions, of using that to handle workflows that internal people would want to have handled for them because it's difficult, whether it's something as simple as like a listener that's there once people authenticate to help them handle a request going through the phone bank or handling decisioning recommendations on a mortgage loan application. The challenge is just not completely like giving the keys to the kingdom over to these assistive technologies and having them do for you, to make an understanding that this is just another tool in your tool belt that you leverage. A good, for instance, of that is using GitHub Copilot to assist you in, say, writing unit tests or provide assistance in doing like regular, I'd say, development work. It's useful for you, but it shouldn't be something that you totally rely on for everything that you do. Because in the regulatory aspect that Joe's also familiar with is, well, if you enter into these programs where you use assistive technologies, well, what is happening to your data? Like, GitHub Copilot uses data from all of the open source repos, that's in GitHub. Banks do not want their code base, being gobbled up, by any sort of tool and then put out there in the industry. We want to keep that partitioned off, locally on there. And then for like ChatGPT, we actually leveraged ChatGPT more recently to actually help us in some of the hiring process of looking at people going through various coding challenges or answering like SBO style questions, situation, behavior, outcomes, to help us change our hiring practice for folks in technology. So in this case, using it in a positive manner, so that way we can have a better outcome in terms of our hiring practice with people. And so I say like any like disruptive technology, like you have to be careful in how you adopt it. You can't jump in with both feet because you don't know how deep the water is. You need to investigate slowly and find the places where it can best be used. And I'd say most especially for us working in the financial institution, risk averse. We have to do things very slowly, purposefully, and do full investigation before we adopt it.
Noted. So I will just add a few things that I see as trends that are not just specific to the financial organizations, but also could be useful in the financial organizations. So I mentioned earlier this shift left for FinOps. I mentioned a bit about the need to prioritize or better prioritize CVEs. And another thing that I'm starting to hear more, and it's not just coming from Lightrun, it's actually becoming very adopted and mentioned by other solutions and vendors, including the APM tools of the world. And that's kind of, we know about BDD and TDD. So there is another D or double D that is being now introduced into the marketplace, and it's called observability-driven development. And you mentioned earlier, Thomas, about the need for observability. So kind of shifting left the observability from the operational guys more towards the developers to directly solve these challenges that we discussed earlier today, right? Being able to pinpoint issues that are either coming from lower environments or from production environments, being able to reduce the cost of multiple technologies that are sometimes legacy and not really efficient. So this adoption of FinOps and observability-driven development, in my mind, are things that we are starting to see growing across the verticals, not just in the financial, but I think they can contribute to each and every vertical based on their regulations, based on their challenges and maturity, of course, and complexity of their applications. And we just need to wait and see. We're not at the end of the year, so we're not in the prediction area right now. We're just talking about what we see as trends, and this is definitely something that, at least in my domain, I see a lot. And with that, I would like to conclude this great panel event and say thank you both to Thomas, Joe, for your time, for your support, and insights that you gave in this webinar. Thank you for that. And for everyone that joined us, either on LinkedIn Live and other channels as well, we thank you for your time. If you want to learn more about everything that we discussed, I definitely recommend you to follow both Thomas and Joe. Joe, you mentioned earlier about the North American awards, testing awards. Thomas is all over the place as well on speaking and trends and content and thought leadership. So do follow these two guys on LinkedIn and Twitter, learn more from their experience. And if you do want to learn more about how Lightrun addresses all these challenges of CV prioritization and other use cases that we touched on, you can go to the lightrun.com website. We have a free trial. We have other resources that you can use and learn from. And we hope that you will find them useful as well. And with that, again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you again, Thomas, Joe, and I hope to see you in the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Very welcome. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.